Okay, preseason game number 2 is in the books, and I think we can call it the Joe Andreessen game. Holy cow. The story of Saturday night. Welcome to It's Always Game Day in Buffalo. Sal Capaccio, Matt Bove with you. Matt, I think we have to start with Joe Andreessen, and then we could talk about the other things that happened in the game against the Pittsburgh Steelers.
You know what's funny is somebody commented because our story at WKBW.com was headlined Greg Rousseau, dominates his Bills get preseason win against the Steelers or something like that. And it was, this is fake news. Andreessen is the star of the show. Totally get it. It's the biggest storyline for sure. I just thought that Rousseau would be the most actual transferable into the regular season because he is going to play such a big factor. Andreessen, though, definitely the coolest story, just given the circumstance and him going out there and not just playing, but playing really well was a super cool sign. Awesome to see a local kid on that stage. Really, really cool talking to him after the game. You talked to him on the field. We talked to him in the locker room. You could just tell how big of a moment it was for him. But it was also impressive of just how everything was so in perspective for him of, hey, I just went out there and did my job. I know there's a lot of things I need to get better at. I think that's the right mindset for somebody in his position to have. And it's really cool to see it kind of come to fruition.
So Andreessen gets the start at middle linebacker, basically because the Bills already have an injury to Matt Milano, as we know. Balen Spector is out. Nicholas Morrow is out, and they want to preserve Terrell Bernard. Let's be honest. You got to, you already have these guys out. We got to protect him. He's been training at middle linebacker. He's been calling the signals, the Mike linebacker position. He does a great job. This Baldy is breaking him down, right? Baldy's tweeting about the guy, and that's just, it's incredible. I think Sports Illustrated did a breakdown on him as well. It's pretty incredible. It wasn't just like this guy showed up and played against third stringers and put up a bunch of tackles. He had 12 tackles in a game where he started against the starting offense of the Pittsburgh Steelers. So let's put this in perspective of how pretty incredible of a night it was. I love his instincts, the fact that he could diagnose so quickly. He was very good in the open field, made a tackle on Justin Fields in the open field. There was a play on Jalen Warren where Jalen gave him a little juke and he was a little flat-footed, and those things are going to happen. I would like to see at some point, okay, what would happen if teams game plan a little bit against him, right? I think you have to keep that in mind as well. But I think just overall from his game, not just the story, Matt, the game itself, this was a legit game. This was not like cleaning up, down the field, 12 yards down the field in the fourth quarter.
Oh, definitely. The one play that he made in the first half where he was able to get in the backfield and stop the play for a negative yardage. The play at the either end of the first half or early in the second half, I think it was early in the second half, where they went for it on 4th and 3 or 4, and he read out the play action perfectly and followed Justin Fields and was able to kind of create havoc and then get that, turnover on downs. He made some really nice plays. There were way more good plays than there were bad plays. And this just feels like another one of these Buffalo Bills, UB Bulls projects that's going to eventually end up in him being part of this team in some capacity. I think I was reading comments on Saturday that were a little bit premature of this guy better be on the 53-man roster. He just made the team. Let's pump the brakes a little bit, everybody. But I think he definitely earned a spot on the practice squad. And I think that he could be there for a couple of years or a year or until there's injuries or something. And he could be the next Cam Lewis, or he could be the next Jamarcus Ingram. You don't have to look that far to find comparisons to what he is now doing, shining in the preseason and maybe using that as leverage into eventually a bigger role.
Okay, so it's a great point you bring up. I don't disagree. It's there's been a little it's great. It's a great story, but going a little far. However, I'll say this: 2 things. Number 1, he's not a Matt Milano replacement. People have to understand he plays a different position. He's not a will linebacker. He's a Mike linebacker. Now, could eventually Joe Andreessen go to will linebacker and he does just as well? I don't know. Who knows at this point? The guy's been great at just coming in and from a rookie tryout standpoint, getting where he is. But he plays a different position. He's the backup Mike linebacker. He's really 3rd, 4th string there. But that's he's not playing for Matt Milano. Okay, that's not going to happen. Here's the issue, though. At the end of training camp, when the Bills decide to cut down to their 53-man roster, everything you said is right, Matt. I don't disagree with you. But in order to do that, after putting that game on film,
you might not get him. You're right.
You might not get him back. If you release him, someone says, I'm taking that guy. A team with a younger roster says that's the exact kind of kid that I need in my defense that I can train. and all of a sudden they claim him because he's a rookie. He would get claimed by another team, and the Bills would just lose him. So
Yeah.
this is the trick that Brandon Beane has to figure out, which is, did he put enough out there? Would teams really love him that much that they would claim him? And am I okay losing him in that scenario? So at some point, he may have to make a decision. Do I keep him over Nicholas Morrow?
Mm-hmm.
I don't think they keep him over Bale Inspector, but I do want to point out that Bale Inspector has had multiple injuries now over the last several years.
Yeah, it's to me, it's if it's like a Nicholas Morrow, I think you do, because I think you can go find other veterans that are a similar skill set that are easier to replace. There's more potential with a guy like Andreessen because you don't know what he could turn into. He could turn into a really legitimate player, whereas with some of these veteran players, a Morrow, a Deion Jones, Bale Inspector isn't a veteran, but somebody who's got a couple more years. You never want to give a guy too up. And Brandon Beane always talks about giving a guy up too early. And he always talks about the learned process that he had with Wyatt Teller and how they were a year too early in giving up Wyatt Teller. Now I know Wyatt Teller, 5th round pick, Joe Andreessen, undrafted free agent. I do think, though, sometimes collectively we're a little bit too close to be able to I agree with you. He probably has put enough out there to definitely keep playing in the league, but I don't know yet if somebody would sign him to their 53-man roster. That's a big jump for a guy who had a strong preseason game against one of the worst offenses in the NFL.
Yeah, I mean, he was an All-American at the college, Bryant University, where he played. I mean, he did do that. He's played this position, he's played this game his whole life, and it's not that he just walked on. It's not, I guess the way I'm going to phrase this, it's not Gable Steveson, right?
No.
Who's never played football before. It's a guy that's trained here. He knows what he's doing. Yeah, it's tough. And if you do claim him, the team claims him, they got to put him on the 53
right away.
Another team, another team, just so everybody knows the mechanics of it. If the Bills were to release him and another team claimed him, they can't just put him on their practice squad. They have to put him on their 53. I'm just saying, I wouldn't rule it out. Let's see what happens this week. Let's see where the injuries fall as well. The Bills have Nicholas Morrow, who's banged up. They have Bale Inspector, who's banged up. Eddie Ulofoshio just came back. That's another one you got to think about, right? Where do they want to put these guys? Dorian Williams is the backup to Matt Milano. He played on Saturday night as well. Other than one play where Dorian kind of overran the dump pass, I thought Dorian acclimated himself pretty well next to Joe Andreessen.
Yeah. With Dorian, what's interesting, it felt like I didn't notice him a ton, even though I was looking for him, which I think is a good thing. The one play you do notice is the one on 3rd down where he did get beat. Now, lucky for him, he had support behind him, so the Bills were still able to force the 4th down and then eventually the punt. I thought he had a fine game. I think that was what we needed to see. Don't stand out as it's almost like, I hate when people say this about defensemen in hockey. I know it's a little bit of a weird comparison, but that it's a good game for a defenseman if you don't notice them. I hate that because defensemen should be able to have some sort of an impact on a game and change the game. I felt that way a little bit about Dorian Williams, where I didn't notice him a ton on Saturday night. And I don't necessarily know if that's a bad thing or if that's, hey, Andreessen was playing really good next to him, or the defense was just dominating. The one thing I will say about Andreessen and Dorian Williams, it's a little tough to gauge their performances. They did a lot of really good stuff, but the Bills were getting after the quarterback.
Yeah.
The Bills are getting after the quarterback. Everybody else on that defense is going to look a whole heck of a lot better because with the first guys out there, Greg Rousseau and Ed Oliver dominated. And then when they got off the field, even Javon Solomon was making a bunch of plays and Kingsley Jonathan was making plays. They consistently got to the quarterback, and I think that made everybody else look better.
All right, so you said Greg Rousseau headlined WKBW on the website. Why? Because I mean, I know why. I should say, why don't you just kind of go through that then from what you saw from Greg Rousseau, who obviously put it together a dominant performance in very limited time.
Yeah, I mean, he played 3 series and had 2.5 sacks.
That's amazing.
Like, how absurd is that? Like, when he wanted to get after the quarterback, he was getting after the quarterback. He was doing it at will. And it feels like Greg Rousseau all summer has been one of those players. When training camp ended in Rochester, I don't know if I said it on the podcast, but I definitely wrote it, that the most impressive players to me were Greg Rousseau, Ed Oliver, and Taron Johnson. Like, those 3 guys every practice felt like they were just on a different level. Josh Allen is their most important player, but Josh Allen had really good days, and then he had so-so days. All three of those guys I mentioned all had just really good camps in general. So this is just a continuation of what we've seen all summer. And I think, Greg Rousseau breakout season could absolutely be on the horizon. And breakout season is double-digit sacks and, probably earning a pretty big contract. And maybe that happens anyway before we even get to the season.
And then on the back end, very quickly, Jamarcus Ingram, you know me, I've been on Jamarcus Ingram here for a couple of years. I really like his game. I think he's finally really showing that he deserves to play in this league. And he's shown that, by the way, for the last couple of months.
Mm-hmm.
But I think Jamarcus Ingram is solidly on this 53 right now.
Yeah, I think so too. I think right now they've got a pretty clear-cut top 4 cornerbacks is concerned. I mean, Taron Johnson will, for the sake of the conversation, we'll exclude him because obviously he's making the team. He might be like one of the best players at his position in the league. So Russell Douglas, Christian Benford, Kyer Elam, Jamarcus Ingram. The really interesting question to me is, what do you do with Daquan Hardy? Because I think he's going to make the team. And do you keep him, Cam Lewis, and obviously Taron Johnson, 3 guys who are kind of all similar skill sets, not similar skill sets, but play a similar role on the team? I think you do. I think now
I think you have to, because Cam Lewis is going to play more safety at this point with all the injuries, and you have to have some insulation there.
Yes, for sure. But as we get closer to guys getting healthier, if Mike Edwards comes back, if DeMar Hamlin comes back, if Cole Bishop comes back, which I know is a lot of things,
right?
But they're also probably about to happen. Like, these were week.
They could come
injuries.
back, but Matt, they still have to they haven't had no reps in this system basically.
I'm not saying from they're going to have to make a decision. Do you just keep Mike Edwards for the sake of keeping Mike Edwards? Obviously, you're keeping Cole Bishop, obviously, but they're going to have to kind of make it, because you can't keep all of them. You just can't.
No, it's going to be some interesting decisions. I agree with you. It feels like they want Daquan Hardy to win that return job if they can get it, right? Like,
yes.
That'd be kind of like the ideal scenario based on what we saw on Saturday night. Very quickly on Greg Rousseau, just you talked about him, and I'll just say he destroyed Broderick Jones, destroyed him. It was unbelievable, right? I mean, just one of those things where, come on, oh my God, like that should not happen to a starting NFL right tackle who was taken in the first round a year ago. I mean, he just completely destroyed him. All right, on the offensive side of the ball, Josh Allen didn't play. It was a good practice on Thursday, a wet field, kind of, sort of, and not a lot of warm-up because they had to put the tarp on. I was stunned that they didn't give more time for warm-ups for the players. They went out there, and Sean McDermott said that was also part of it. So we know why. Mitch Trubisky came in, again, didn't look that great. I mean, he was uncomfortable. He held on to the ball too long. And then ultimately, unfortunately, he got a knee injury. Matt, this is an issue now that the Bills are going to have to start evaluating what they have and what they have to do at backup quarterback.
Yeah, and this won't be a Ben DiNucci type move if there is any sort of significance to this injury. The Bills might need to go find no, this is not meant to be a disrespect or a knock to Ben DiNucci, but Ben DiNucci is here to be the Bills' third quarterback for the time being and play snaps in the preseason. The Bills now need to find out who is going to be their real backup quarterback. And that's a 2-layered conversation, because one part of that is because Mitch Trubisky is injured, and the other part of that is because Mitch Trubisky hasn't been very good when he's needed to play. The obvious name is Ryan Tannehill, but is Ryan Tannehill even feasible or available for what the Bills are going to be willing to pay? They only have so much money, and I don't know if it's the wisest thing in the world to spend that as an insurance policy, because I'm just of the belief that if Josh Allen gets hurt, your season's done anyway, really. So why go pay $5 million to Ryan Tannehill to try and, tread water if the injury isn't something significant? I just don't know what they're going to do there, because I think they're going to have to go sign somebody this week.
Well, if Josh Allen's hurt long-term and, if something were to happen to him, of course, but if he was to miss, let's say, 4 games, you still have to have somebody who you can count on to be able to play. And I mean, that's an important piece. Let me ask you, would you consider Matt Barkley coming back?
Not as a backup. That's what I thought would happen.
He's not a starter, obviously.
Well, I mean, not as the number 2 quarterback. And I don't think you would just release Ben DiNucci and then have Matt Barkley. I know Matt Barkley knows your system. That's why I thought Matt Barkley made more sense than Ben DiNucci. Just go bring Matt Barkley back. If they would have done that, they would have probably had a little bit more time to figure something out. Like, they could have gone into this preseason game with Barkley and been fine. But if Mitch Trubisky is going to miss this game or potentially into the future, they have to do something. Like, they're not going to have, even if you have Josh Allen play a quarter, you're not going to have Ben DiNucci probably play 3 quarters. I just don't see that happening.
I think you would.
You think so?
Yeah. I mean, this week, to me, there's a different discussion. There's the preseason final week, and then there's the season. Like, I think this week, yeah, sure, you put Ben DiNucci in there, have him hand off to Frank Gore Jr. Absolutely could see him playing the full game even. Like, I have no problem with that. I think the Bills could do that. You would have to have maybe somebody else in uniform to go out there and do the same thing, if that were to be the case. My issue is what happens in the regular season. You need a legitimate backup quarterback. If Mitch Trubisky is injured, and again, this comes down to not for the season, but if Josh would have missed a few games, you got to have somebody come in and be able to steer the ship a little bit. Somebody, to me, who probably knows the system a little bit. Like I said, like a Matt Barkley. What about if Kyle Allen shakes free from the Steelers? He's there right now. Would you consider bringing him back? Because maybe he says, I can go to Buffalo and be number 2 instead of being on a practice squad. I think what ultimately the Bills would probably do here, Matt, is wait until final cuts to see who's around and then say, this is a guy that we like. He has some familiarity with whatever coach on staff that we've seen him before. And then you make DiNucci number 2, and then that guy comes in as your 3 until you kind of have to swap roles or something else happens or Trubisky gets back. I think that's how you have to play it out, because to me, there's 2 separate. I don't think there's an issue with having Ben DiNucci play the full game on Saturday if they have to.
Do you think there's an issue of having Mitch Trubisky as your backup quarterback, even if he's healthy?
It's a good question. The Bills have to decide that because he has not looked great. I think the Bills would have more faith. Do you remember last year? The same thing happened to Kyle Allen. The Bills never moved on from him.
Yeah, I know, but it's also the circumstance that they don't have a ton of money and a ton of wiggle room because you've got a pretty stacked roster, a pretty full roster. So it's how much are you willing to invest in that spot? It was the same thing as Case Keenum a couple of years ago. It was like, okay, Case Keenum doesn't look good. It was the same thing with Kyle Allen. The only outlier was Mitch Trubisky. In his first stint in Buffalo in the preseason, he looked really good. And you were like, okay, like, hey, Bill's got a backup quarterback now. So I think the Kyle Allen name you said is the one to keep an eye on, because if you're the Steelers and you keep Russ and you keep Justin Fields and you try and have Kyle Allen on your practice squad, the Bills might be like, well, nope, for right now, they take him. He becomes their backup. Ben DiNucci becomes their practice squad quarterback. So that's probably the most likely scenario that happens, but that would require waiting a week and a half.
All right. Elsewhere on the offense, much better day running the football. 3 different running backs average over 5 yards a carry, including Ray Davis over 7 yards a carry. Whereas as the running backs last week, under 2 yards a carry total. Much better running the football. I loved what I saw, especially from Ray Davis.
Yep.
But it calms me down a little bit about the way they ran the football much better.
Yeah, Ray Davis looks good. Ray Davis, I think, has a pretty decent sized role on this team. Now, you were at the joint practice in Pittsburgh. I came down the next day, but I was talking to one of our colleagues, Dan Fates from 13 Wham in Rochester, Buffalo Plus, and he told me Ray Davis was one of the most impressive players during that joint practice because of the way that he was catching balls out of the backfield and how he was just running routes and looked like a wide receiver. And we kind of saw his ability in the passing game in the first preseason game, but in that game, we didn't see the rushing ability. Well, in this game, we saw the rushing ability. And then when you combine that with all of the opportunities we've seen from him in the summer catching the football, the skill set is nice. And I mean, he runs with juice. You can just tell when guys run like that, and he's got a way of running about him where I do think that he will be absolutely the primary backup to James Cook. I think he'll have a different skill set. Like Ty Johnson is going to play. Ty Johnson, I think, is going to be their short yardage situational guy who can also, pick up blitzes and can help you occasionally in the passing game. But I think Ray Davis has a path to seeing the field pretty often.
Ray Davis is going to be 25 years old. You know what his full name is? You know his full name?
I do not.
Okay. Raymond Walter Jamar Davis.
Wow. Well, Ray. So
Ray
Davis.
Ray Davis.
It's like Eddie Ulafoscio.
Yeah, there you go. You got it.
That's Eddie.
All right, let's before we wrap up here, nice short. It's always game day in Buffalo. Thanks for being with us, by the way, wherever you pod, on audio, also on video at Sal Sports on the YouTube page. So Keon Coleman, a lot being made of the play in the end zone. Again, only 1 catch for 12 yards. Receivers really, I mean, this goes back to the Trubisky point, so we don't have to necessarily get too deep on it. but just on Coleman himself, are you at all concerned about Keon Coleman at this point after 2 preseason games, both of which he had balls thrown his way in the end zone, 3 of them now they didn't come up with?
Okay, I think both of these things can be true, and they're not like mutually exclusive of each other. Keon Coleman should have made that catch. And I'm not that worried about Keon Coleman considering Josh Allen has thrown 3 passes in the preseason. I still think that Keon Coleman has a good sized role on this team and has a skill set the Bills will be able to take advantage of. And I also think that he should have made the catch for Mitch Trubisky, even knowing it wasn't a great throw. What I posted yesterday, if Josh Allen throws that ball, everybody is saying he needs to make that catch. Keon Coleman needs to make this catch. But Trubisky does not get the benefit of the doubt the same way Josh Allen does because he's not Josh Allen and because he was not playing well. So immediately when that play happens, everybody's like, better throw, and that's an easy touchdown. Well, it's like, yeah, true, but also that's your highest drafted player this year who is supposed to be able to do things like that. So should have made that catch. Not that concerned at all about his future outlook. I think that he needs time on task with Josh Allen, and Josh Allen has not had time on task with anybody in actual preseason games.
All right, so we are going to hear today. Matt and I are recording this today, this podcast. It is Monday. It's about 9 a.m. We're going to hear from Sean McDermott a little bit later. He's going to touch on injuries. So let's just wrap up real quickly on some of the injuries. We talked about Trubisky. We don't know where that's going to go. Marquez Valdez-Scantling left the game, neck injury. Jeremy Fowler of ESPN reported on Sunday, x-rays negative. We'll see where that goes, but it is something to monitor, especially, of course, because of the wide receiver depth chart and where that stands. Austin Johnson, defensive tackle, left the game with a calf. Tight end Quentin Morris left the game with a shoulder, and Javon Solomon left the game with a calf. I will tell you on all 3 of those, Matt, they were all on the sidelines in uniform at the end of the game. So I think I'm encouraged by that, but we'll see where everything goes.
Can I ask you one thing to wrap up, and then we'll talk more about this later this week? If the injury to MVS is anything that's more than like a day, a couple days or a couple weeks, who knows? Is there a chance this team keeps 5 wide receivers and 4 tight ends? Because I don't think that's out of the realm of possibility.
I brought this possibility up a couple of weeks ago, but I'm going to tell you, even though I brought it up a couple of weeks ago, I'm leaning towards no.
You don't think it's possible?
Is it a possibility? Yes. I think it's much less likely than I believed it would have been a couple of weeks ago.
I just wonder who in the wide receiver room has proven that they definitely deserve a spot after the top 4, and the top 4 being
nobody.
That's what I mean. So if it's Khalil,
but has Zach Davidson proved he definitely needs a spot?
More than Tyrell Shavers,
I disagree. I think Tyrell Shavers has earned a spot on this roster. I shouldn't say that definitive. I think that the way they've treated him compared to Zach Davidson, even though Davidson has flashed, Tyrell Shavers to me is much more firmly on this roster.
I think so too. I don't disagree with you. I just don't know if I agree with it. I agree with the idea. Like, I think there's a better chance Tyrell Shavers makes the roster than Zach Davidson, but I think Zach Davidson has had a more impressive. It's hard to compare them because Tyrell Shavers has probably done more, but Zach Davidson has had bigger moments.
But your question is, what do you think they're going to do? And not what you would do, Matt Bovates. What do you think they're going to do? And to me, I think there's way more chance Tyrell Shavers is on this roster than Zach Davidson.
I mean, Tyrell Shavers had an exceptional training camp, given who he, where he was drafted and, the situation. And he's had 2 catches in the preseason. And he's had a lot of time on the field. It's not like this has just been.
But Matt, he's also a gunner.
Yeah, no, I know. And Zach Davidson doesn't have a special teams role, although they've tried him there to see if maybe he could. Their biggest play the other day was Zach Davidson. I'm not saying that's a good thing. I'm just saying he was on the receiving end of their literally biggest play of the night.
I still think he's the 4th tight end.
Yeah, Quentin Morris.
The 5th receiver on this team is way more firm than the 4th tight end.
I think, because I think they're going to use a lot of 12 personnel.
I do too.
And then that becomes an interesting question of, is there a path to the field more often as a depth tight end or as the 5th wide receiver? Like, when is but special teams aside, which I know is a big factor here, when is Tyrell Shavers getting on the field?
I don't know, but I don't know if Zach Davidson would. I don't care how much 12 personnel you run. He's the 4th tight end.
Yeah, I know. And then the MVS thing is interesting because it's well, if he's injured, you could maybe start him on IR and have 4
Right.
games off, and like then you have a little bit more
I
flexibility.
think, and listen, the biggest unfortunate, the way to say this, benefactor of MVS might be KJ Hamler because he's a field stretcher. I know
Mhm.
he's not the body type, but maybe that's it could be Andy Isabella. I know it's a different role, but maybe that's where your other receiver comes from. I don't, it's a great question you posed though about what if MVS is hurt a little more long term? Like,
Mhm.
do they keep another receiver? I think that's more likely than keeping a 4th tight end. That's my bottom line.
And then I guess my issue with that, even though I agree with you, is I don't think anybody else that they would be keeping would have earned a spot more than Zach Davidson, right? Like if they keep KJ Hamler, if they keep, I was going to say Chase Claypool, but he's not even here anymore.
Right.
I don't think it's going to be Justin Shorter.
Demir Bird, right? I mean, who
Yeah,
knows?
exactly. Like Andy Isabella, Zach Davidson had a good summer. Like Zach Davidson has done everything that he needed to do and will still probably just end up on the practice squad. Totally fair. You can get that guy to your practice squad. I don't think that's going to be an issue at all. But I also think you can get KJ Hamler to your practice squad. And I also think you can get Andy Isabella to your practice squad.
You can. It'll be interesting how all this shakes out. We do have a couple weeks left. Still have another game Saturday against the Carolina Panthers. It's Kids Day, by the way, Saturday, 1 p.m. inside Highmark Stadium. All right, Matt and I are going to take off now, but we'll have another episode a little bit later this week of It's Always Game Day in Buffalo, wherever you pod on the audio side. And of course, see our smiling faces at the South Sports YouTube channel. All right, Matt, I'll catch up with you at practice this week.
Sounds good.